The sun rose over Seoul University, casting a golden light on the old brick buildings. A new professor, Ji-hoon, walked through the gates, his briefcase in one hand and a confident smile on his face. He looked young, perhaps too young to be a professor, but he carried himself with an air of quiet authority. From a window on the second floor, a student named Min-jun watched him. Min-jun was known for his pranks and his sharp tongue. He saw Ji-hoon and smirked, nudging his friend. "Look at the new kid," he whispered. "He thinks he's so cool. Let's teach him a lesson." Later that day, Min-jun found Ji-hoon in the hallway, looking at a map of the campus. "Lost, little one?" Min-jun said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "The freshman orientation was last week. You're late." Ji-hoon didn't flinch. He slowly folded the map and put it in his briefcase. "I'm right where I need to be," he said, his voice low and steady. "And I'm not lost. Just getting my bearings. It's a big campus." Min-jun's smirk faltered for a moment. This wasn't the reaction he expected. Min-jun decided to try something more direct. He and his friends set up a bucket of water on top of the door to the lecture hall. "He'll never see it coming," Min-jun chuckled, hiding behind a pillar. Ji-hoon approached the door. He paused, a small smile playing on his lips. Instead of pulling the door open, he pushed it gently from the bottom. The bucket tilted, and the water poured harmlessly onto the floor, splashing Min-jun's shoes. Min-jun's jaw dropped. His friends, who had been watching from a distance, burst into laughter. Min-jun's face turned bright red. He had been outsmarted, and in front of everyone. The bell rang, and students filed into the lecture hall. Min-jun slumped into a seat in the back. A few moments later, Ji-hoon walked to the front of the room, a laser pointer in his hand. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said. "I'm Professor Ji-hoon, your new literature professor." Min-jun's eyes went wide with disbelief. After class, Min-jun was the last to leave. He shuffled his feet, avoiding eye contact with the professor. He expected to be yelled at, or at least lectured. But Ji-hoon simply walked over to him and leaned against the desk. "A good prank requires a good mind," Ji-hoon said softly. "You have one. Don't waste it. I'm starting a new research project on classic literature and its modern interpretations. I could use an assistant." He held out a hand. "What do you say, Min-jun? A fresh start?" Weeks passed, and Min-jun found himself spending more time in Professor Ji-hoon's office than in his own dorm room. The research project was surprisingly interesting, and Ji-hoon was a patient, encouraging mentor. The old smirk was gone, replaced by a look of focused concentration. "You know," Ji-hoon said one evening, leaning back in his chair, "all work and no play makes for a very dull mind. You should come to the university gym with me sometime. It's good to clear your head." Min-jun hesitated. He hadn't been to the gym in months. He was used to being the one in control, the one pulling the strings. But with Ji-hoon, he felt a strange sense of calm. "Okay," he said, a little surprised at his own voice. "Okay, Professor." The next day, they met at the university gym. The air was thick with the scent of rubber and sweat. Ji-hoon was already there, working on a pull-up bar. His muscles strained with each repetition, and a sheen of sweat glistened on his skin. Min-jun watched him, a quiet fascination growing in his eyes. This was a different side of the professor. Not the calm, collected academic, but a man of strength and discipline. He felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the humid air. Ji-hoon finished his set, dropping lightly to the floor. He grabbed a towel and wiped his face. Then, without a second thought, he pulled his t-shirt over his head. The fabric was soaked with sweat. He tossed it into his gym bag. Min-jun's breath hitched. He had never seen someone so comfortable in their own skin. The sight was both a shock and a revelation. It was a moment of raw, unedited humanity, and it made the professor seem less like an authority figure and more like a man. "Your turn," Ji-hoon said, a small smile on his face. He gestured to the weights. "Don't just stand there. Let's see what you've got." The words were a challenge, but his eyes held a warmth that made Min-jun's heart pound. Min-jun nodded, a new determination in his eyes. He walked over to the weights, feeling a strange mix of nerves and excitement. He wasn't just working out, he was stepping into a new world, a world where he was seen, not just for his pranks, but for who he could be. As the evening wore on, the gym became their own little world. The clanging of weights, the quiet encouragement, the shared exhaustion, it all wove together into a new kind of understanding. The prankster and the professor were gone, replaced by two men, building something new, one repetition at a time. The university stadium was a roar of cheering students, a sea of school colors. Professor Ji-hoon sat in the stands, a rare day off from his research, watching the final football match of the season. He wasn't much of a sports fan, but he had a very specific reason for being there. His eyes scanned the players on the field until they found him, Min-jun, a whirlwind of energy and skill. He moved with a grace that surprised Ji-hoon, dodging tackles and weaving through the opposition. He wasn't just playing, he was thriving, a natural leader on the field. The sun beat down, and the game was intense. Min-jun felt the heat rising from the turf, the sweat slicking his skin. He felt a sudden, impulsive need to shed the excess weight. With a deft movement, he pulled his jersey over his head, tossing it to the sidelines. Back in the stands, Ji-hoon's breath caught in his throat. The sight of Min-jun, shirtless and powerful, was a jolt to his senses. The boy he had known only in the quiet of his office or the shared exhaustion of the gym was now a force of nature. A different kind of heat, a deep, unfamiliar thirst settled in his chest. The final whistle blew, and the crowd erupted. Min-jun's team had won. He was mobbed by his teammates, but his eyes were already searching the stands. He saw Ji-hoon, standing and clapping, a proud smile on his face. A wave of warmth washed over Min-jun, and he knew exactly where he needed to be. Ji-hoon made his way down to the edge of the field, his heart pounding with an excitement he hadn't felt in years. He saw Min-jun pushing through the crowd, his face flushed with triumph and exertion. When their eyes met, the noise of the stadium faded away. "Professor," Min-jun said, his voice a little breathless. He stood before Ji-hoon, still shirtless, his chest heaving. Without a word, Ji-hoon reached out and pulled him into a hug. It was a firm, all-encompassing embrace that felt like coming home. Min-jun's arms wrapped tightly around Ji-hoon's back, burying his face in his shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, the world a distant hum. Min-jun felt the steady beat of Ji-hoon's heart against his own. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting Ji-hoon's. The space between them felt charged, a silent question hanging in the air. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to Ji-hoon's lips. The moment stretched, a fragile, beautiful thing. He closed the small distance, his intention clear. But just as their lips were about to meet, a sudden, loud cheer from the crowd broke the spell. Ji-hoon's eyes flickered, and he gently placed a hand on Min-jun's chest, creating a small space between them. "Let's get you cleaned up," he said, his voice low and steady. The moment was gone, but the promise of something more lingered in the air. The knock on the door never came. Min-jun sat on his bed, his phone glowing with a new message from Ji-hoon. He stared at it, his thumb hovering over the screen, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. The image of Ji-hoon's hand on his chest, the gentle but firm push that had stopped him, was seared into his mind. He couldn't face the professor, not after that. Across campus, in his quiet, orderly office, Ji-hoon felt the silence of his phone like a physical ache. He had sent another message, a simple, "Are you okay?" that had gone unanswered. He couldn't focus on the papers on his desk. His mind was a whirlwind of questions. Was Min-jun angry? Had he misread the moment? The student's sudden distance was a puzzle he couldn't solve. That night, sleep offered no escape. Ji-hoon tossed and turned, his thoughts consumed by Min-jun. He finally drifted off, but his dreams were a vivid, intoxicating replay of the moments he had been trying to forget. He was back at the stadium, but this time, there was no crowd, no interruption. In the dream, he was holding Min-jun. It was a different kind of embrace, not a hug of comfort, but one of deep, undeniable desire. He felt the warmth of Min-jun's skin against his, the soft brush of his lips against his own. There was no hesitation, no fear, only a profound sense of rightness. The dream shifted, and they were in a shower, the steam swirling around them. The water cascaded over their bodies, a cleansing, intimate flow. Ji-hoon's hands were on Min-jun's shoulders, and he was looking at him with a gaze that held all the unspoken feelings he had been trying to ignore. He woke with a jolt, his heart pounding in his chest. The dream was so real, so vivid, that he could still feel the phantom touch of Min-jun's skin. He sat up in bed, the morning sun streaming through his window, and a sudden, breathtaking clarity washed over him. He wasn't confused anymore. He was in love. He got out of bed, his movements no longer hesitant. He showered and dressed, his mind made up. He had been so afraid of his feelings, of the consequences, that he had pushed Min-jun away. But the dream had shown him the truth. This was what he wanted. He wanted Min-jun. Ji-hoon walked out of his apartment and onto the bustling campus. He ignored the students who greeted him, his eyes fixed on a single destination, the dorms. He had to see Min-jun. He had to tell him everything. He had to make things right. He found Min-jun's building and walked up the stairs, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. He was a professor, and Min-jun was his student. The world would not understand, but for the first time in his life, he didn't care. He stopped in front of Min-jun's door, his hand raised to knock. He took a deep breath, the words he needed to say already forming on his lips. He was ready to face the music, to face Min-jun, and to finally tell him the truth.